Hey folks, today's show is brought to you by Fanly, my favorite sports app for iPhone and Android. Fanly delivers all the info you could ever want about your favorite sports teams, fast and free from over 2,000 trusted sources. I use it every single day, and you should too. It's the perfect alternative to all those big media companies' clunky sports apps. Get it right now for free. That's Fanly, Fanly. Let's get to today's show.
It's the Harris Football Podcast with your host, Christopher Harris.
All right. Yeah. Hey, I am Chris Harris. This is the Harris Football Podcast. You are at the right place for the Harris Football Podcast. Never thought it would get here, but here it is. We can actually start talking about Week 1. Amazing. And we will do so in today's show. Although there are still a few drafts left for Thursday night's opener. One of them is another La Liga Lebowski clone. D-Liga Lebowski. Good luck to all you folks in D-Liga. And another league that'll be drafting soon is the Parody League. Many of your favorite Harris Football Podcast parody accounts, like at Amber's Drops, and at What a Trash Bag, and at C. Harris Shelf, and a bunch more, are getting together, and they're going to form a league, and Cousin Josh will be in it as well, which, of course, ensures that there will be massive amounts of smack talking. Anyway, calling all parody accounts. I think right now they have 10 teams. They're looking for 12. So even if you want to start a new parody account to be in this league, get in touch with at Amber's Drops to play.
Today's kickoff.
Speaking of Amber, there she is. There's a lot to do today. I will review the many, many transactions that happened over the long weekend to dig out whatever fantasy information that we can. We'll have a little movie talk, as I actually had time to go to the movies this weekend. Of course, a Nightmare Fuel mailbag, and then Evan Silva of Rotoworld will be by, and we will talk Week 1 waiver wire. Now, Week 1 is finally here, folks, and our coverage of daily fantasy sports is about to kick into high gear. You should go to DraftKings.com and open up an account, and we'll have a fun time playing at DraftKings all season long. You probably know by now that DraftKings is America's favorite one-week fantasy football site. I played there all last season, in addition to La Liga and my other leagues, and it was a blast. And now we've got this podcast, and we can spend time every week looking at the player salaries on DraftKings and helping you make picks. Hey, why wait until Week 16 to get paid in a fantasy league, right? At DraftKings, you can play whichever weeks you feel like it, put your fantasy skills to the test, and make money. There's no season-long commitment, and there's a wide variety of games you can play at DraftKings, including the Week 1 Millionaire Maker, where someone's going to win $2 million. Don't wait. Play along with me. Go to DraftKings.com and enter the promo code Harris, and they'll give you one free entry. That's DraftKings.com. Promo code Harris, and let's play together. So there's that. Hey, I also thought I should mention, it looks like we're going to have a new way to answer your questions this season. You may already follow me on Twitter, at Harris Football, and I encourage you, if you don't, to do so. On Thursday night, before Steelers-Patriots, I'm going to tweet out a link to a live video stream, and you'll be able to tweet me questions and then see me give answers to those questions in real time. We did a test last Friday. Some of you helped out. Thank you very much. And it worked pretty well. So an hour or so before kickoff Thursday, be sure to check out my Twitter feed at Harris Football for a live video link. This is something I think that I'll be doing throughout the season, including on Sundays after inactives come out to take a bunch of your lineup questions. It should be pretty fun.
Let's talk waiver wire.
Lots of NFL transactions to run through. I figured we'd start with the Patriots backfield, where New England apparently will go into Thursday night's game without a big back, Jonas Gray. A pretty shocking cut over the weekend. Apparently, there's a chance he could wind up on the island of misfit toys in Tennessee with all the other mediocre running backs in the NFL. But of course, away from the Patriots, he probably loses a lot of his fantasy appeal. LeGarrette Blount is suspended for week 1, but his season workload seems like it just got safer, at least until and if the Pats sign another big back. What's left behind for week 1? The running backs on the roster are Brandon Bolden, Dion Lewis, James White, and Travaris Cadet. You know, Bolden qualifies as a big back. He's 220 pounds. Compared to the other guys, he's the big back. And he's been with the team a few years, so you would think there's some trust there. But, you know, I've never really seen much evidence on tape that he's a terrific between-the-tackles runner. Lewis was good in a single preseason game, but what does that mean? You know, I think anyone outside the Patriots locker room who says they know what the usage will be Thursday night is lying, which means while I wouldn't begrudge you for owning any of these guys, none of them is so talented that he's an obvious must-own, and I don't think you can start any of them on your fantasy squad week 1. For all my trash bagging of Blount, the departure of Gray, it's good news for his fantasy stock. Off the top, you heard me talk about Fanly, my favorite sports app. If you download it for free, I have a sneaking suspicion it'll be your favorite too. I got so tired of the big companies' attempts at a sports app. Dude, all I want is news about my teams, maybe some scores. Does it really have to take 2 minutes to load your dang app? Fanly, on the other hand, sleek, really well-designed, intuitive, cuts through all the nonsense, just gives me exactly what I want. And if you like this podcast, you probably have heard me talk about Fanly before, and maybe you've already downloaded it, and thank you for that. Hopefully that means you're a convert like I am. And if that's true, another way you can help the little podcast that could is to recommend Fanly to your friends and family. The more downloads that Fanly gets, the better it reflects on our podcast. Plus, as I've said, we're not accepting advertisers for stuff I don't believe in. And I really do use Fanly every day. So get Fanly for free right now. That's Fanly for iPhone, for Android, Fanly. Let's sort through some other transactions, roster news from the NFL from this weekend. James Jones gets cut by the Giants, immediately signs with the Packers, which I don't think is particularly good news for the burgeoning fantasy stocks.
I roll.
For burgeoning. Okay. For the fantasy stocks of Ty Montgomery and Jeff Janis, we won't know how this is going to go until we actually see the Packers play in Chicago Sunday. My suspicion is that Aaron Rodgers will feel more comfortable making up for the loss of Jordy Nelson with his old pal James Jones. Heck, I think you can make the argument that Jones actually could hurt Devontae Adams, though, you know, I haven't gone there in my ranks just yet, because it's also possible that Jones is just window dressing and someone like Montgomery will stay ahead of him on the depth chart. Again, we have to see it. But at the moment, if I'm rostering Montgomery or Janis and Jones is available, I think I'm probably making that roster swap. Kristen Michael goes to the Cowboys in a trade. Evan Silva and I are going to talk about this move at great length later in the show, but let's just say, while I'm skeptical that Michael will suddenly turn around his NFL life in Big D, the opportunity is enough that I'd say Michael should probably be owned in all leagues, if not necessarily all teams in all leagues. There's probably at least one team in every league that could benefit from a high upside potential guy like Michael. I mentioned Jonas Gray will work out for the Titans. If he signs, he'll join Terrence West, whom the Browns traded to Tennessee this weekend. Bishop Sankey, still the lead guy here, and David Cobb was placed on IR, designated to return, meaning one of my favorite backs of this NFL draft season won't be eligible to play until week 10, meaning redraft leaguers, you don't need to hold on to him. That's a bummer. Bishop Sankey, Dexter McCluster, and Antonio Andrews figure to carry most of the load week 1 against the Buccaneers. It's tough to get into using any of those guys in your fantasy starting lineup. If it's a group that consists of West, Gray, Antonio Andrews, only Bishop Sankey stands apart as being a superior athlete, so he's still the one that I'd want to own at this moment, but it sure sounds like a rather gross platoon. What's interesting is that left behind in Cleveland are Isaiah Crowell and Duke Johnson, though the Browns also added Sean Drone this weekend. As I've said, Crowell, not a particularly special player on tape. I was a little more excited about him during last season, if you listened to my prior podcast, and went back and watched a lot of his tape this winter and felt like, I think maybe I was a little overly excitable. I think he's fine. I think he's an adequate player. I think he's a banger. I think he will definitely run over guys. But, maybe not an elite player, but, if the Browns are able to move the ball more this year than they did last year, Crowell now looks like he's in line to be the prime beneficiary. Duke Johnson hasn't practiced yet after suffering a concussion, so it's an open question if he'll be available for the Jets game Sunday. But, speaking about the entire season, no Terrence West. It helps Duke Johnson's value too, and in a point per reception league, there could be some real value there, fairly soon. The Colts cut Boom Herron and Zerlon Tipton, leaving one of my super deep sleepers, Josh Robinson, as Frank Gore's primary backup, at least, until Indy maybe adds one of the recently departed backs to their depth chart. In this window during which I'm talking, I'd say anyone who drafted Gore probably should handcuff Robinson, except, maybe in very shallow leagues. But as I say, it won't be a shock to see the Colts add another big back here soon. The Broncos jettisoned Monte Ball, Heisman finalist, second-round draft pick in the NFL. And his collapse is nothing short of stunning. Remember, last year, we were selling him as a top 3, I guess, pick, like a third-round pick at minimum. As a rookie, I thought Ball was, okay on tape. He basically barely played last year after his groin injury, but I think what this tells us is that Denver really did not like what they saw from Ball in practice, stuff that we just don't get to see. He'll land somewhere for sure. And, of course, whatever that landing spot is, that's going to dictate whether he has any value. But there's a productive player in there somewhere with Ball. He's got some good athleticism. He's got an NFL frame. I'll just say it would be interesting to see if another organization could get him going. Todd Gurley and Victor Cruz won't play week 1. You'd have thought from all the optimistic reports about those guys 4 weeks ago, they'd each be candidates for All-Pro, right? And what do you know? Everything came back around to my point of view, which is that players and coaches lie their butts off, and we should never pay attention. These guys, Gurley and Cruz, they had serious injuries. It's not surprising that they're not ready to go just yet. And all those glowing training camp reports, let's go back, let's read them all. They were all a bunch of nonsense. People needing to fill space and players just saying what they wish is going to be true. That doesn't mean you should drop them. Not at all. They still may be ready to contribute at some point. Certainly, I think Gurley will be. What this means is stop listening to glowing training camp reports. Quickly, Brandon LaFell goes on the PUP list. Is eligible to return week 8. That's not good. It means only deep leaguers need to think about holding on to him. Will the Patriots get anything out of Aaron Dobson or Danny Amendola or Chris Harper? Certainly we can watch Thursday with this question in mind, but you're not assuming that it is the case yet. The Bills cut Matt Castle, meaning they'll have Tyrod Taylor backed up by E.J. Manuel, which means there is no alternative in Buffalo who's an accurate thrower. I'm not sure that's particularly good news for Sammy Watkins, but we'll watch and see what Taylor can do Sunday against the Colts. Tim Tebow got cut. So much for the fantasy world spending 10 minutes this summer on whether Tebow was ownable for his potential 2-point conversions. And there was kicker madness, kicker carnage. Caleb Sturgis, Dustin Hopkins, Nick Novak all got cut, lending credence to the idea that kickers are simply an annoyance in fantasy football.
Hey Chris, tell us what obscure movie you saw this week.
Well, I finally got to see The End of the Tour, which is a movie about David Foster Wallace, a pretty important author to me. So I thought I'd take a few minutes and talk about that. If you're only interested in what I think about football, I apologize in advance. Feel free to skip ahead, a couple minutes. So, End of the Tour, I'll start by saying I like the movie. I recommend it, whether or not you've read any Wallace. Jason Segel, pretty good impersonation of Wallace from what I remember. I actually met Wallace really briefly once at a book reading of his, so it's not like I'm any kind of expert on what he was really like. But I will say, I often kind of shrug when a pop culture person dies and people go into hysterics, like Paul Walker. I'm sorry to say that was kind of lost on me. But when I heard David Foster Wallace killed himself, I actually cried. I was sitting right where I am now at this computer. I had lived for about a decade walking around, feeling whatever, lonely, misunderstood, whatever. But multiple times a week, I remember I'd think to myself, I was happy that Wallace was out there in the world writing something that might make me feel better, or at least that might have some level of insight into what it's like to be a person. I was really sad for the pain he was obviously in, which always came right through in his fiction. But I'm a fiction writer myself. The truth is that if money was no object in the world, that's probably what I'd do. Nothing against fantasy football, but I would probably just write fiction. Anyway, I have no belief that you know a person just because you read his or her writing. You don't. You get impressions. But geez, we have a hard time really knowing the people who live in our houses, who sleep in the same bed as us. The idea that we actually know people hundreds of miles away because of the stories they make up, that's a pretty goofy notion. Of course, we feel as though we do. Maybe you feel as though because you hear my voice on this show, you know me, and personally, I'd like to think that's true too, but it probably isn't. I can't control what you interpret out of what I say. Plus, as Wallace would have it, I'm totally modulating my worst qualities. So anyone listening will think, wow, what a cool guy. All right, so anyway, all this is by way of saying I like The End of the Tour as a movie, but it has an agenda, and that agenda cuts pretty close to home for me, which is to earnestly try and give a sense of what Dave was like, in large part reconstructed from tape transcripts of an interview he gave. And I think it's technically very proficient, and it has its message about what it's like to be famous, how much it can kind of pull you apart. But in the end, it's a biopic, and so it's trying to do something that's impossible, which is dramatize a person's personal philosophy and way of being, trying to kind of tie him up in a neat little package. And of course, we all know life is messier than that. And I also think it's kind of a bummer that we even want to see or hear a writer to look at his ear hair and his crow's feet, because what we love about that person is the thing they made, not so much the stuff we never get to really know about them. It's better to just stick with the books. But then again, there I was, crying when he died. So I'm a total hypocrite. Anyway, this guy's writing still means a lot to me. I think you can probably tell, considering I'm going on and on. I saw the movie, The End of the Tour, and I liked it. I recommend it. It sort of spurred something on in me that I felt like I wanted to say a little something. I don't think the goal should be to leave the theater feeling like now we know David Foster Wallace better. Ugh, that's creepy. Phew. Talk about bringing the show to a crashing halt. Let's actually move on and have fun, shall we?
Time for the mailbag.
Yeah, I'm at a furniture store in Wisconsin, and I just saw Christopher Harris sitting in a sofa, mumbling over and over to himself, Stephen Hill, Joik Bell, LeGarrette Blount. I know my butt's a genius. Stephen Hill, LeGarrette Blount, Joik Bell. I know my butt's a genius.
Hey, man, I'm down here in Cincinnati. I just walked out of Rock Bottom here, and Christopher Harris is down here on Fountain Square burning a Andy Dalton jersey, and he's got a megaphone just screaming into it, free AJ Green.
No, I'm sure I just saw Christopher Harris on the beach in Montego Bay. He was wearing these outrageous dreadlocks, so I wasn't really sure it was him until I noticed that somebody burst a balloon on the sidewalk, and he went up to them and called them a jaguar and told them to throw the T-Rich balloon in the trash can. After that, I was pretty sure it was him.
I guess all that is by way of saying I sure got around on Labor Day weekend. I don't have much in the way of tweets and emails to share with you. I think a lot of you were off from your tweeting and emailing over Labor Day weekend, except for those of you who wanted to know how I thought you did in your draft. And once again, you've already drafted. What does it matter what I think now that you have a team? But we have a Twitter account that's dedicated specifically to How'd You Do, and it is at How'd I Do FF. So if you're interested in how you did in your draft, I'm probably not going to be able to get back to you. However, you can tweet to at How'd I Do FF, and I am assuming get an unbelievably detailed response.
Today's guest.
And today's guest is Evan Silva of Rotoworld. He can be followed on Twitter at Evan Silva. Did you like the passive voice there? He can be followed.
Yeah, it was great.
Grammar is my thing. Thanks for doing this, Evan. And I hear you had a busy, long weekend. I'm sure it was filled with lots of fun and no work, right?
I actually just posted the final cuts on Rotoworld all weekend. So, no, it wasn't fun.
It really kind of wasn't, was it?
No.
Yeah, there were some surprising ones. We talked about a few of them earlier in the show. But we're going to talk waiver wire because I don't know about your Twitter feed, but my folks seem to want to change their entire teams just as soon as they draft them. They're like, oh, should I drop that guy for that guy? Do you get a lot of those questions?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, lots. And so many that I can't even answer them, and I wish I could help, but I can't do them all.
Yeah, me neither. In fact, usually before week one, I don't do too many of them because my philosophy tends to be you just drafted these guys. Apparently, you liked them well enough to draft them. Let's just hang loose and see how they do. But still, there are some names that are interesting that we can talk about. That are on the waiver wire in a lot of leagues. I've got some names to hit you up with, and you can fire back with some different suggestions or whatever, but I sort of perused the ownership levels at Yahoo and came up with some names that I get asked a lot about. So let me ask you a question. If you had to add one running back for week one, or not even necessarily for week one, for like the first month of the season, I got a couple who are owned in 30% of Yahoo leagues. Are you more interested in D'Angelo Williams or Ronnie Hillman?
This is a good one, and I think that it has to do with your philosophy, and I think that the decision has to come down to your philosophy. There's one school of thought that you want RBs on your bench who are getting work.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that if you need to use them in a pinch, you know you're going to have a guy who's going to get you some work at least, and that's D'Angelo Williams. Whereas we don't know what Ronnie Hillman's week one role could be. It could be, it could be very, very small to nothing.
Yeah.
Because Gary Kubiak is very much a believer in using a bell cow back system, and he said that openly, and his career track record speaks to that. But Ronnie Hillman is probably a more talented player than D'Angelo Williams. at this stage of their respective careers. And if something went right for Ronnie Hillman, like CJ Anderson, went away for whatever reason, Ronnie Hillman could be a league winner, whereas D'Angelo Williams, even in D'Angelo Williams' best case scenario, is probably just going to be a guy that gets you by and, doesn't really help you win weeks. And one thing that I like to say is that fantasy football, especially redraft season long leagues, is a weekly game. You're trying to rack up wins. You're trying to get weekly wins. Ronnie Hillman, if he caught a break, he would be a weekly winner for you.
Yeah, it's interesting. For these couple of weeks, if obviously you're a Le'Veon Bell owner, you're thinking D'Angelo Williams can help me right now. I think I'm probably with you. I think I'm probably rostering Hillman, even though I have to say I have deep questions about whether Hillman would last as a feature back.
Right.
Juwan Thompson is there too. No Monte Ball anymore, but would Hillman be a weekly guy? Yeah, but I think you're right. D'Angelo Williams, under no circumstances in his current incarnation, is a league winner, so probably I'm with you on Hillman. Does Matt Jones, who's owned in even fewer leagues, is he more interesting to you than either one of those two guys?
It's a good question. Again, if I need a guy who I feel okay starting in week one, because I drafted, let's say, Arian Foster, or if I drafted Le'Veon Bell, or if I drafted, Todd Gurley, I'm probably going to go with D'Angelo Williams, because Matt Jones is, again, in a situation where we just don't know how much work he's going to get. He could surprise us all and get a lot of work, or he could get a very small amount of work. And so I would lean D'Angelo Williams if I'm in a pinch in week one. But if I want, again, upside on my roster, Matt Jones would be my guy.
If you were going to choose upside-wise between knowing what we know now, which is it's unconscionable, Evan, that you're admitting that you don't know stuff. That is not cool, man. What are you doing? But Matt Jones or Ronnie Hillman, if you're looking at it with totally imperfect information, which guy would you say has the higher upside for the season?
Because I trust Kubiak when he says that he believes in using a bell cow back, and that's what his resume says as well. I would say that Matt Jones has a better chance of being a producer, a flex option early in the season, and I would therefore lean in that direction. Plus, I think we all love what we saw out of Matt Jones in the preseason. We're looking for reasons to break ties, and you already brought up the fact that Ronnie Hillman, when he has had a chance in the lead back role before, he kind of broke physically. Yep. And Matt Jones, he's 6'2", 230. He's not a guy who's going to break physically in all likelihood. So, yeah, in terms of who I'd rather stash Matt Jones than Ronnie Hillman right now.
Me too. I'm with you. I think size has a lot to do with it. I am very much of the mindset that, I want the big guy who can maybe handle a feature role. Alfred Morris, free agent at the end of the year. Who knows what Washington's nonsense is going to turn into this year? Maybe at some point we say, okay, this has to turn into some sort of platoon. We have to know what we have in Jones, and he could excel. I'm with you there. I mentioned your Twitter handle, @EvanSilva, and folks who follow you saw a tweet about Brandon Coleman that I found very interesting. I follow you as well. That I did not realize, which was about Coleman's usage versus Marcus Colston in the preseason, which we don't want to draw too many conclusions, but Brandon Coleman's only owned in 23% of Yahoo leagues. Relay for me what that tweet said and what you think it might imply for the Saints' receiver usage.
Yeah, Brandon Coleman started over Marcus Colston in the Saints' second and third preseason game. And the third preseason game, of course, is supposed to be a regular season dress rehearsal. Now that may, and then Marcus Colston entered in 3 receiver sets as the slot receiver. Now that may mean very, very little, but let's look at Marcus Colston for a second, because this is a guy who had his role scaled back in the Saints offense last year. First of all, he wasn't a full-time player in terms of his snap percentage. Second of all, he saw the second fewest targets of his entire NFL career in a Saints offense that led the NFC in pass attempts, and also on a team that dealt with, of course, the season-ending injury to Brandon Cooks. Jimmy Graham was banged up. They lost Pierre Thomas, who was a target machine at running back. You know, Marcus Colston was a declining player last year. He's a year older now. You know, I know that there's been some support for him in the fantasy community, but I would shy away from that. I mean, the arrow is pointing down on him as a player, and I think the Saints are looking for Brandon Coleman to step up. Now, whether Brandon Coleman is capable of executing, I think that's a different story. We really didn't see him produce at all in the preseason until the preseason finale, with, you know, backup quarterbacks in there, et cetera. But I think the Saints, if Brandon Coleman could show to the Saints that he can be productive, that he can be productive in the running and in the passing games, you know, that he can be a big, effective blocker, and that he can be an every down receiver, that they would give him that role, and they would, you know, continue to limit Marcus Colston's snaps and, you know, continue to limit Marcus Colston and try to keep him around for the entire year, because he's an old guy who's had a lot of career surgeries.
So I admit not to having looked this up in your final top 200 of the preseason. Who do you rate higher between Colston and Brandon Coleman? Who would you rather own?
Well, I would rather own Colston,
Okay.
but it's not by a whole lot.
Okay. Yeah. I agree with that. I remember last night, I think I got a Twitter question like, why don't you have Brandon Coleman in your PPR top, I can't remember how many, top 80 or whatever. And, you know, I would say he was close. There's a lot of receivers in the NFL. But let's go back a month and talk about that Saints receiving core when Coleman was kind of another name next to Nick Toon and Shantavius Jones, neither of whom, you know, he clearly beat those guys out. So you're right. The Saints saw something that we don't get to see, and we didn't see it in the preseason, but they've seen enough to say, all right, well, if we're going to hitch our wagon to someone, we're going to try it with Coleman. I agree. This is a really interesting early season storyline, and Coleman is not necessarily worth dropping a very good established player, but in a deeper league is worth adding just because of the possible upside.
Well, Chris, and I don't want to get too far off topic, obviously, but what does all this mean for you for Drew Brees? Because we have a lot of unknowns in this pass catcher core. We got Ben Watson at tight end who turns, 35 in a few months. He's the number one option at tight end. We got Brandon Coleman, might be the number two option at wide receiver. We have a guy who I think in all likelihood is very much in decline, and Marcus Colston is the number three.
Yeah, you're leading the witness, Your Honor. He's leading the witness. I think I'm going to come to the same conclusion as you, which is that that's why I don't view Drew Brees as a top 5 fantasy quarterback this year. There's a lot of risk, to say nothing of questions on the offensive line. It's not enough to say, okay, they added Max Unger at center, and now everything that was a problem with Drew Brees in terms of protection last year is now filled. I mean, boy, there are questions at tackle. That's the position you're supposed to firm up first in New Orleans. I think Brees might be under some duress. We don't know who he's throwing to. He's a great player who's probably also on the decline. I think I feel the same as you. Do you feel as I do that Brees is, he's still a top 10 option, but maybe not top 5?
Yeah, I have him as QB6, I think.
Yeah, I think I might have him at 7 or 8. So agreed. A lot of uncertainty there. The cause du célèbre, the important player who was traded, not cut. I mean, this is going to ruin all fantasy leagues. Christine Michael. This guy's been taunting us for 3 straight years now, and now he's with the Cowboys. And certainly the most asked about player that I got questions about this weekend were, should I be dropping Justin Forsett for Christine Michael? Not really, but close. What's your level of confidence that Christine Michael, let alone week 1, that he'll be a factor in that Cowboy backfield, and what size league do you think he needs to be added in?
Very little confidence that he will emerge as a factor. I mean, I certainly wouldn't rule it out, but this is a guy who, look, he has incredible running ability. He has like explosive lateral movement. He can make you miss. He can run you over. I mean, he is a gifted individual, but he does dumb things. The way that he runs is kind of, he runs dumb. He will run into the backs of his blockers, and then he'll make a special play and he'll make you forget about that. But I mean, the fact is he could not get ahead of Robert Turbin in Seattle. Seattle, one of the best organizations in football, gave him up for a conditional 7th rounder just 2 years after using a 2nd round pick on C-Mike. And there are serious questions about his commitment to football. He wasn't a productive player for most of his college career. I think he had one decent year. As a senior, he played behind Ben Molina, who the Cowboys recently cut. This is not just, he couldn't get ahead of Bob Turbin in Seattle because Bob Turbin was a 3rd down back and, he was a better complement to Marshawn Lynch. This is a long history of Christine Michael failing to meet expectations and failing to capitalize on his big-time running ability for a series of different reasons. He went to a good landing spot in theory, but I don't at this point. I mean, we're in year 3, and year 5 of really looking at him closely as a player, going back to Texas A&M. So I don't have a whole lot of confidence in him ascending the depth chart, even as weak as the depth chart is.
Yeah. So when the Kristen Michael biography needs to be written, people can come to Evan, and it's going to be titled "Running Dumb: The Kristen Michael Story."
Right.
Love it. Completely agree. It's that ability is so tantalizing, but just if you can't get ahead of Robert Turbin, if you can't even threaten the field, it just feels like something's missing between the ears, which stinks. I think he probably can be owned in all leagues. I think even in 10-team leagues, you can probably find someone on your bench who doesn't have the upside that Michael does. Because we've seen the light go on. Chris Carter saw the light go on. He became a Hall of Fame player after being a complete knucklehead for years. So it can happen, and if it were to happen, he'd be a superstar. But I'm with you. Confidence level is pretty low that that's going to happen. And you're not starting him week 1. He's not going to be ranked in my top 50 running backs in week 1. I promise you that. I'd be surprised if he sees the field. Quarterback and tight end solutions. I'm going to wrap up with, if folks feel like they need a quarterback solution in a 2-quarterback league, just a couple of rookie quarterbacks, and then a tight end fill-in for week 1. If you had to own one, this is a 2-quarterback league. If you had to own one of the rookies, Marcus Mariota, Jameis Winston, each are owned in fewer than half of Yahoo leagues, which one for the season, not just for week 1?
Before training camp in the preseason, I definitely would have said Jameis, and but after watching Mariota in the preseason, I would probably lean toward him. But Jameis still has that cake schedule. I mean, if you go in the Rotoworld draft guide and you look at strength of schedule for quarterbacks, Jameis is sitting there with number 1. So that's appealing to me. The big wide receivers are appealing to me. But Mariota looked just so poised and NFL ready, and they brought him along as a pocket passer. I mean, I think they ran one read option play with Mariota all preseason. I like that approach by the Titans. So that they want him to be a Steve Young type quarterback, instead of a Michael Vick type quarterback, where he's going to be a pocket passer first, and then he's going to have that running ability in his back pocket, and every once in a while they'll mix in, some a little bit of trickery. But I would go with Mariota, and that could look dumb, within the first 6 weeks of the season because of the weapons that Jameis is surrounded by and his aggressive passing mindset. And I do think it's close, but I love what I saw from Mariota in the preseason. I hope they get Dorial Green-Beckham cooking, because that dude is a tree, and he can move, man. I mean, he is a fluid mover. I think he's going to be a special player.
Okay, so the Dorial Green-Beckham biography, also to be crafted by Evan Silva, and we're going to call it The Moving Tree. I think I'd take Winston, and it's because of the weapons. I'm with you. Mariota adds something that he hasn't shown yet, which is, people need to remember what kind of runner he was at Oregon. I think I still would say Winston would be the one I'd prefer to own, because I don't trust too much of the receiving talent in Tennessee. And finally, tight end. Antonio Gates. I know I drafted him in an industry league, a 12-teamer. I'm going to wait on him for a month. If you had to choose between Ladarius Green as an ad, who's obviously going to sub for Gates for a month in San Diego, or someone like Richard Rodgers, maybe, against Chicago this week, and, hopefully looking forward to being Aaron Rodgers' main dude. If you're going to pick between Green and Rodgers, who would you add?
Richard Rodgers. Ladarius Green is another Christian Michael type that we're all very, very fascinated by. I mean, trust me, I'm very fascinated by Ladarius Green. If you look at his performance on a per target, per snap basis, you definitely think that he's special. If you look at his measurables, he runs like 4.5 at 6'6", 240. He has what you want on paper, but the Chargers coaching staff has never made an effort to really make him a big part of their passing game, and they have their reasons for that. And they have another guy there by the name of David Johnson, not the running back in Arizona, but he's like a big time blocker. He's a former fullback, or he plays some fullback still. So I don't have any kind of, I don't want to have any investment into Ladarius Green, considering what the Chargers coaching staff has shown that they think of him. Richard Rodgers, I think, is going to be a near full-time player, caught 5 balls for 60 yards and a TD during the preseason. And with that wide receiver core weakened, I think we may see, Richard Rodgers could score 9 touchdowns this year. That's within his range of outcomes. Another guy I would look at is Ben Watson in New Orleans. I know I made fun of his age earlier, but he's going to be a full-time player on the field a lot with Drew Brees, and Drew Brees seems to love him. So I would look at him on the waiver wire as well. They play Arizona, by the way, in week 1, which historically has really struggled to cover tight ends.
So, who do you have? This is another thing where I'm not looking right at your ranks. Did you rank Watson or Josh Hill higher in your top 200?
I actually had Watson higher.
Okay.
Move Josh Hill down a lot. He's a part of the first team offense, but he's going to be like
on and off the field.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and Watson's going to be out tight there. End. Right. Yeah. Watson's going to be out there in single tight end formations. He'll be blocking a lot, but I can see that. Okay, Evan. Thanks for doing this. We sort of had to work around your schedule. You were so kind with your time, as you have always been. People should be following Evan at Evan Silva for some good, juicy information. And, of course, look at the Rotoworld profiles, because poor Evan is chained to a desk having to crank out all of these, 9th tight ends and 18th linebackers who got cut. You're a yeoman, Evan.
Oh, thanks. That's the first time I've ever been called a yeoman. Thank you, Chris, for having me on the show again. This is my second appearance. My first appearance must not have been that terrible.
Oh, you were
great.
If
you had me back again.
We had you back quick, too. You're the best.
Yeah, that's right.
Awesome, man. Thank you very much for doing it.
Thanks, man.
That's our show. And, of course, we've loved all our guests. And everyone who's been on the show hopefully will be back on sometime soon. Thanks to Evan for coming on today. Tomorrow we'll have Sig Bloom back on the show, and we're going to talk about Week 1 ranks and lineup questions. And HarrisFootball.com will, as of Tuesday afternoon/evening, have my Week 1 ranks up on the website, and hopefully that will be a pattern. Hopefully, I think Tuesday afternoon/evening will be when my first look ranks will be online. It's ambitious, but I think I can do it, and I think it will be of use to all of you. So that's the plan anyway. And then Wednesday shows will deal with the fallout from those ranks. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.
The Harris Football Podcast's opening theme is Under the Gun by Apex Manor. The end theme is Tooth and Claw by OU Villain. Subscribe to the Harris Football Podcast on iTunes and never miss an episode.